Human history begins long before we think it does. The story, written in our textbooks, starts around 6,000 years ago with the rise of the first cities in Mesopotamia. But the story written in clay, pressed in wedge-shaped marks by hands long turned to dust, hints at something older, something stranger, something that should not exist according to the comfortable model of slow human progress. When archaeologists uncovered the Sumerian tablets in the mid-1800s, they expected simple myths, farming records, or prayers to forgotten gods. What they found instead was a voice from an earlier world. The tablets spoke with confidence about times that sounded impossible. They described kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years, cities that existed before a great flood, and knowledge that seemed to appear fully formed without any slow development behind it. And yet, despite their age, the tablets are specific. They are organized. They are written with the same matter-of-fact tone that a modern accountant might use to list tax records. This is not how myth sounds. This is how memory sounds. The Sumerians never claimed to be the first civilization. In fact, they insisted the opposite. Every time they wrote about their origins, they described themselves as inheritors of something older. They reused older city foundations. They copied older texts. They named their astronomy, their mathematics, and even their political authority as gifts lowered from heaven. To people today, that phrase sounds religious or poetic, but in Sumerian, the expression is literal. The same verb is used for rain falling. It describes something coming down physically, something descending. Before the flood, the tablets say, kingship descended once. After the flood, it descended again. The message is clear. Civilization did not rise, it was given. But given by who? The tablets name a group of beings called the Anunnaki. In later myths, they are reimagined as gods, but in the oldest texts, they are presented differently. They work, they build, they teach, they argue, they make decisions, they walk among people. They are not metaphors for natural forces or planets or emotions. They are administrators with responsibilities. Their roles sound almost governmental. And the creation of humanity, according to the oldest surviving versions, did not happen through magic or divine wish. It happened through a process. A problem was identified. The workers serving the Anunnaki were tired. A solution was proposed. Create a new being to handle the labor. The method was described step by step. Mix clay and a special essence, shape the mixture, and let it rest. It reads less like mythology and more like a recipe. These ideas sound impossible today because we assume human evolution followed a slow, steady path. But genetic research has discovered something that bothers many scientists. Between 200,000 and 50,000 years ago, the human brain changed too fast. Regions of our DNA, now called human accelerated regions, mutated thousands of times faster than the normal evolutionary rate. These regions affect language, planning, memory, and abstract thinking. In other words, they affect everything that makes us human. Why did it happen so fast? No one knows. At the same time, archaeologists found strange genetic signatures in ancient remains from Mesopotamia, lineages that appear suddenly, vanish suddenly, and match no known population on Earth. These are not Neanderthal or Denisovan markers. Those are well understood. These signatures belong to something else, something unnamed, something that appears only in the oldest layers. All of these threads, the tablets, the genetics, the sudden rise of civilization, point toward a world we barely understand. Imagine this. Long before our known history, a human-like species existed, similar in appearance but different in cognition. Maybe they lived in the now submerged Persian Gulf basin, once a fertile land with rivers and lakes. When the Ice Age ended, sea levels rose more than 100 meters and swallowed that entire region. If a civilization lived there, nearly every physical trace of it would be underwater today. The survivors, or their descendants, would have moved north into Mesopotamia. They would have brought knowledge, stories, tools, perhaps even written symbols. Over generations, those memories would blur. Myths would form around facts. And when a new flood struck, washing away their rebuilt cities, the last survivors would preserve what they could: memories, names, ideas, instructions. They pressed those memories into clay because clay endures. The Sumerians inherited these tablets. They copied them faithfully, even when they no longer understood all the words. They preserved a story older than themselves, a story that stretches back into the darkness before the flood, before recorded time, before our species fully became what it is now. The world before the flood may not have been a world of simple hunter-gatherers. It may have been something more complex, a world that ended so suddenly that only fragments survived: broken bones, odd genetic markers, strange elongated skulls, astronomical knowledge far beyond what early farmers should have possessed, instructions that sound like engineering, and tablets that insist, not suggest, not hint, but insist that humanity was designed, not discovered. Today, these ideas sit at the edge of academic comfort, but the clay is older than our comfort. It remembers what we have forgotten. And if the tablets tell the truth, then our history is not the beginning of the story. It is the middle. The story of the world before the flood is not only about knowledge, it is also about isolation. When you read the ancient tablets carefully, a quiet theme appears again and again. The first civilization felt alone. Not spiritually, not emotionally, but physically. They describe a world that was empty, wide, and strangely quiet, a world with no other cities on the horizon, a world in which only one group had writing, astronomy, architecture, and law. This loneliness is important because real civilizations do not grow in isolation. They rise from competition, trade, conflict, and exchange. Egypt traded with Nubia. Rome fought with Carthage. China interacted with the steppes. But the earliest cities of Mesopotamia, Eridu, Badtibira, Shuruppak, appear fully formed. No slow development, no rival culture shaping them, no earlier style evolving into a new one. Archaeologists have always been troubled by this. Civilization appeared suddenly around 4000 to 3500 BCE, and the first Sumerian cities already had standardized weights, irrigation systems, temple architecture, and administrative systems. These are not inventions of beginners. These are signs of people who remembered something, people who rebuilt what they had once known. But where did they know it from? The tablets repeat a phrase that scholars usually translate as "before the kingship came down." This phrase appears in the Sumerian king list, in temple records, and even in hymns. It divides time into two eras, a time when humanity lived without guidance, and a time when authority descended from the sky. Modern readers assume this is poetic, but the tablets describe this moment with alarming precision. They list names, locations, durations of rule, and even the duties of each early leader. These are not mythic
kings who ride dragons or command storms. These are administrators with responsibilities related to agriculture, law, water management, and teaching. If the tablets are memories, then the descent may represent the arrival of people from a lost region, survivors carrying fragments of a drowned culture. They would have appeared suddenly in the north, bringing tools, knowledge, and stories of a world swallowed by the sea. To the farmers living in the river valleys, these newcomers would have seemed powerful, wise, almost godlike. And over generations, their arrival would transform from memory into myth. It is possible that these survivors remembered the loneliness of being the last of their world. When a civilization collapses, the survivors often feel detached from the people who come after. Their knowledge becomes both a gift and a burden. They try to preserve what matters, but they also struggle with what has been lost forever. The earliest Mesopotamian myths reflect this sadness. The gods constantly argue about whether humanity is worth saving or destroying. They fear another disaster. They worry about the mistakes of the past. They speak about earlier ages that ended in fire, water, or silence. One line, found in a damaged tablet from Nippur, reads, "We walked the earth alone, counting the years of the darkness." Another line, translated from a fragment dug up near says, "We were few, and the land was wide. We carried the knowledge on clay and in blood." The second line is especially strange. What does it mean to carry knowledge in blood? The tablets never explain, but today's genetic evidence makes that line seem less symbolic. The sudden burst of human brain development, the appearance of new neurological traits, and the odd genetic signatures in early Mesopotamian remains suggest that something changed dramatically in the human line, and that the change may not have been natural. If ancient survivors of a lost civilization interbred with early humans, the result would look exactly like what scientists observe today: rapid cognitive development, sudden leaps in cultural complexity, and isolated genetic markers that later disappeared as populations mixed. But the tablets are not concerned with genetic science. They focus on memory, on what it felt like to be the only people holding the fragments of a forgotten past. They describe the fear of losing everything again. They describe rituals designed to preserve knowledge through disaster. They describe calendars meant to predict floods, eclipses, and changes in climate. And they describe a strange group of beings, the Anunnaki, who seem both human and more than human. In later myths, the Anunnaki are turned into gods with magical powers, but in the earliest texts, their roles sound administrative, almost bureaucratic. They assign tasks, manage cities, teach farming, and maintain law. They are not supernatural, they are supervisors. Some researchers suggest that the Anunnaki were simply an earlier ethnic group with unusual knowledge. Others believe they were remnants of a forgotten civilization. Others interpret the word as a title, not a species, something like the governors or the overseers. Whatever they were, the Sumerians remembered them as different, taller, longer-lived, wiser. Some descriptions mention unusual skull shapes, elongated and narrow. Archaeologists have found skulls like this in Iraq, Iran, and even Turkey. Many of these examples show signs of intentional shaping, but some appear natural. These natural ones do not match any known human group. Who were these people? The tablets never answered directly. Instead, they focus on the loneliness of being different, the loneliness of carrying memories no one else shared, the loneliness of guiding a world that did not understand the danger of repeating the past. The flood myth in Mesopotamia is not simply about divine punishment. It is about a civilization terrified of losing itself again. When the flood approaches, the tablets describe frantic efforts to save archives, seeds, animals, and knowledge. The survivor, Zui Sudra, or Utnapishtim, depending on the version, is instructed to preserve the wisdom of the before times. The Ark is not just a boat, it is a library, a seed vault, and a cultural capsule. When the floodwaters recede, the survivors emerge into a quiet world. The cities are gone. The fields are ruined. The population is almost extinct. This moment, the moment after the flood, is where the Sumerians place the true beginning of their history. Everything after the flood is reconstruction. And in that reconstruction, the loneliness returns. The tablets mention the days when the land was empty, and the time when only the wise ones walked. They describe a world in which a handful of survivors carry the memories of an entire age. They know what was lost. They know what should not be forgotten. They know that they are the last link. This loneliness shaped the early Sumerians. It made them obsessed with record-keeping. It made them build archives. It made them track the stars. It made them create laws to prevent chaos. They were terrified of another collapse. The oldest writing on Earth is not a story, a prayer, or a myth. It is a list. Grain rations, measurements, workers, storage. The first words humanity ever pressed into clay were about survival, because the memory of the first civilization was still alive, and so was its fear.
For thousands of years, human history has been presented as a straight line. Simple hunter-gatherers slowly becoming farmers, farmers evolving into early cities, and then cities expanding into the great civilizations we know. But every time archaeologists dig deeper into the soil of ancient Mesopotamia, this simple story begins to fall apart. Around the rivers of the Tigris and Euphrates, civilization appears too quickly, too suddenly, and too completely. It is as if someone flipped a switch and humanity went from primitive villages to organized city-states almost overnight. The Sumerians built temples, irrigation systems, astronomical observatories, administrative buildings, and writing tablets that show a level of order no early culture should have possessed. But the Sumerians themselves never claimed to be the first. Their texts repeatedly say something shocking. We did not invent civilization, we inherited it. In the cuneiform tablets, this older civilization is described not as myth, but as memory. A world that existed before the flood. A world destroyed by a violent reset. A world in which beings, called the Anunnaki in later Babylonian retellings, ruled for spans of time that defy biology. Thousands of years. Tens of thousands. Modern scholars write these numbers off as superstition. But what if they are distorted memories of something real, not literal gods, but perhaps a population, human or almost human, that existed before the catastrophe? A population genetically or cognitively different from us. Because the deeper we dig, the more signs we find that something older existed beneath the earliest Mesopotamian cities. Under layers of flood sediment, we find architectural foundations that do not match Sumerian building styles. Tools carved in ways the Sumerians never used. Burial remains with cranial structures unlike any known group in the region. Not elongated skulls created by binding, but natural elongation from birth. Features passed through genetics, not culture. And the most puzzling evidence of all comes from genetics itself. Some pre-Sumerian skeletal remains carry mitochondrial haplogroups that don't match known human migrations. Others contain Y chromosome markers that cannot be traced to any identified ancient population. They are not Neanderthal.
They are not Denisovan. Those signatures are well understood. These are something else, genetic ghosts, appearing briefly and disappearing just as quickly. Like remnants of a people wiped out so thoroughly that only fragments remain. If an earlier version of humanity existed, physically similar but mentally different, we might expect to see exactly this. Traces in the genome, but no continuous lineage. Cultural echoes, but no living descendants. Myths that preserve structure after the details fade. And the myths are disturbingly consistent, not only in Mesopotamia, but across continents separated by oceans. Stories of a world-ending flood. Stories of beings descending from the sky or the mountains to restore knowledge. Stories of rulers whose lifespans stretch far beyond our biological limits. Stories of a golden age lost, and a new humanity created or reorganized after catastrophe. These myths appear in South America, Australia, East Asia, Africa, the Pacific Islands, cultures that had no contact with each other, yet the stories shared the same bones, the same structure, the same rhythm. It is almost as if they are all remembering the same thing. A global event, a reset. A world that ended, leaving only a few survivors who carried fragments of memory into the new age. The Sumerians describe humanity being shaped from clay mixed with divine blood. For centuries, this phrase was interpreted as poetic metaphor. But what if it was their attempt to describe genetic engineering? What if the clay was the physical body, and the blood of the gods was a way of saying altered genetics? They described the process step by step, as if reading from instructions rather than inventing mythology. 7 vessels, 7 attempts, a trial and error process. Those tablets read less like myth and more like a laboratory notebook written in symbolic language. But perhaps the most important clue is something simple. The Sumerians never took credit for their own knowledge. Their mathematics, given by the ones who came before. Their kingship, lowered from heaven after the flood. Their writing system, a restoration of pre-flood knowledge. Their cities, rebuilt according to ancient plans. Every thread leads back to the same idea. They believed they were the continuation of something older, something destroyed, something that left ruins buried beneath the mud, and memories preserved only in clay. And this idea becomes even more compelling when we realize how much the ancient world knew that they should not have known. Some Sumerian tablets contain star maps that match modern astronomical calculations, not approximate guesses, accurate observations. They knew the precession of the equinoxes thousands of years before the Greeks. They mapped planets invisible without telescopes. They calculated lunar cycles with precision, matching modern data. How? Where did this knowledge come from? The easiest answer is the one ancient people themselves always gave. We remembered. Not invented, remembered. The flood myths are not about simple rainstorms. They describe a targeted erasure, a deliberate destruction followed by resetting civilization. The survivors did not create new knowledge. They preserved the remnants of the old. Beneath the soil of Mesopotamia, beneath the flood layers, beneath cities rebuilt on top of older cities, lie the remnants of a world erased. And every new excavation brings us closer to understanding that the story of humanity is not a straight line. It is a cycle, a rebuilding after a collapse. We are not the first to rise. We are the first to forget. The clay tablets whisper the same truth over and over. We are living in the shadow of a world that came before.
If the Sumerians truly inherited their knowledge from an older world, then the obvious question becomes, who built that world? Every fragment we uncover, genetic traces, anomalous bones, advanced astronomical calculations, myths repeating across continents, points to the same possibility. A civilization existed before the flood. A civilization erased so thoroughly that only echoes remain. But echoes are still evidence. Archaeologists call the deepest layers beneath cities like Eridu, Kish, Shuruppak, and Uruk pre-dynastic horizons. These layers contain ruins that do not match later Sumerian or Akkadian architecture. The bricks are different. The foundations are different. The orientation of structures follow patterns that seem astronomical, not practical. Some walls align with solstice rising points. Others point toward constellations that were significant long before recorded agriculture. These ruins do not belong to the Sumerians. They belong to someone the Sumerians called their ancestors, but not in a biological sense, in a civilizational sense. These were the builders of the forgotten age. The tablets refer to them as beings of great knowledge, teachers, architects, organizers, not literal gods, but individuals whose abilities seemed divine to those who came after. They knew mathematics, medicinal plants, metallurgy, irrigation engineering, and star cycles. They built cities on higher ground, as if aware of the coming flood long before it happened. And in every story, these beings appear suddenly. There is no myth of their childhood, no legend of their origins, no transition from primitive to advanced. They arrive already possessing knowledge. They govern for impossibly long periods. They leave abruptly, or perish in the flood. It is as if they belonged to a different model of humanity altogether. Modern researchers sometimes call this mysterious group the Ubaid people, named after the archaeological culture that predates Sumer. But the Ubaid culture itself might have only been the final echo of something older. Their temples, pottery designs, and strange figurines showing elongated skulls and large eyes have puzzled scholars for decades. Were these simply artistic exaggerations, or stylized memories of a different-looking population? Because the skulls some archaeologists actually found, especially in older Mesopotamian burial sites, are not merely long from cultural modification. Some show natural elongation, a shape formed before birth, baked into the genetics. The same strange feature appears in ancient Peru, in North Africa, in the Black Sea region, and among the earliest peoples of the Near East. Populations separated by oceans and continents practiced head-shaping, yes, but only after individuals with naturally elongated skulls appeared to vanish from history. It is almost as if later cultures were imitating the appearance of an earlier elite. Why imitate them? Because they were the builders, the architects, the ones who brought knowledge. This same theme appears in myth after myth. Across the ancient world, civilization is almost never described as something humans invented. It is always something humans received. The Dogon of West Africa claim teachers descended from the sky to give them astronomy. The Maya say knowledge came from the first people who lived before a flood. The Australian Aboriginals speak of ancestral beings who shaped the land and taught survival. The Greeks talk about titans and a golden age before a great destruction. The Egyptians credit their civilization to the followers of Horus, a mysterious pre-dynastic group. And the Sumerians say kingship descended from heaven before the flood, disappeared, and then descended again after the flood. Different continents, different languages, same structure. This is the signature of cultural memory, not invention. In every story, a catastrophe erases the old world. In every story, survivors rebuild using fragments of inherited knowledge. In every story, the new humans do not fully understand the old world, but they preserve what they can. The flood myths describe a deliberate reset. Not random, not accidental, not a normal storm. A purge, a cleansing, a return to zero. If the world before the flood had advanced knowledge or genetics different from the post-flood population, then the flood becomes more than a myth.
It becomes an explanation for why genetic anomalies appear briefly in the archaeological record and vanish. It explains why pre-flood architecture and astronomical understanding exceed what hunter-gatherer groups should have been capable of. It even explains why human-accelerated regions mutate with unnatural speed, as if a new template for humanity appeared within a shockingly short time. Because something changed us. Perhaps the true architects of the Forgotten Age were not a separate species entirely, but a branch of humanity modified, uplifted, or enhanced in ways we have not yet fully understood. A branch that did not survive the catastrophe, but left behind its imprint in myths, genetics, and ruins. And if this older world possessed knowledge we cannot explain, then the Sumerians claim that their role was not to create, but to remember. They did not start civilization, they restarted it. Their temples, cities, and tablets were attempts to restore what had been lost. Their astronomy was not invention, it was preservation. Their myths were not fantasies, they were memories compressed by time, simplified and retold after the details faded. The deeper we dig into Mesopotamian soil, the more we uncover remnants that should not exist. Stone tools older than known civilizations, foundations beneath flood layers, cuneiform tablets that reference the cities before the waters, lists of kings who ruled for spans impossible for modern biology, stories of beings who shaped humanity for a purpose and then vanished. Every discovery brings us closer to one conclusion. Humanity as we know it is not the beginning of the story. We are the continuation of something older, something engineered, something erased. And if that older world left behind teachers, builders, and architects, what else might it have left beneath the soil, still waiting to be found?
If the flood was truly a reset, then the ruins beneath ancient Mesopotamian cities should tell that story. And they do, quietly, stubbornly, in layers of mud and silt that archaeologists often label simply as flood debris. But these layers are not debris. They are a dividing line between worlds. When excavators first dug into the city of Shrupik, they found something surprising. A thick layer of river-borne clay, untouched by human hands, sealing a much older city beneath it. Above the clay lay the familiar Sumerian civilization. Below it lay foundations with different architecture, different patterns, and tools made with techniques the later Sumerians did not use. The flood was not a metaphor. It was a geological event. The same layer appears under Uruk, Ur, Kish, Nineveh, and Eridu. Not a puddle, not a seasonal flood, but a continent-shaping catastrophe. And below that layer, the world looks different. In Eridu, the city the Sumerians called the First City, the deepest levels reveal structures far older than the earliest Sumerian dynasties. These foundations were built with unusual orientation, as if aligned with star positions thousands of years earlier. Walls are thicker, stones heavier, construction methods more advanced in some ways than the later societies that would rise above them. It is as if the first city was not truly the first. It was a rebuilt version of something older. The Sumerians themselves claimed this. They wrote that their cities were restorations of pre-flood cities constructed according to the ancient plan. They insisted that kingship existed before the flood, was taken away during the catastrophe, and then descended again from heaven to Eridu to restart civilization. Archaeology has begun to confirm the first part. The second part remains a mystery. Beneath the flood layer, human remains appear with genetic markers that do not match later populations. Some skulls show unusual cranial vault shapes. Some bones are longer, leaner, or denser than the typical Sumerian build. And then, without explanation, these markers disappear above the floodline. A population wiped out, replaced by a new one. A genetic reset mirroring a cultural reset. The genome remembers what the myths whisper. If the builders of the Forgotten Age truly existed, we would expect their artifacts to survive in fragments. And they do. We find tools carved from unusual stones, ceramic fragments with pigments that require temperatures higher than early Mesopotamian kilns could reach, small figurines with elongated heads and wide eyes, found in the Ubaid layers, a few metal objects made of alloys that later civilizations never mastered. None of these items match what mainstream history predicts, but they match the stories. In many tablets, pre-flood beings are said to have lived in cities with 7 walls, 7 gates, and 7 temples. Archaeologists found 7-layer temple platforms in Eridu, and they were older than the Sumerians. Too old, in fact, for the conventional timeline. The number 7 appears so consistently that it stops being symbolic and starts being structural, part of a blueprint. A pattern left behind by people who knew their world was ending. The more we uncover, the clearer it becomes. Human civilization did not rise from nothing after the flood. It was rebuilt from memory. Knowledge did not evolve, it re-emerged. Writing did not begin, it was restored. Astronomy did not discover, it was remembered. And this memory suggests something incredible. The pre-flood world may have had knowledge equal to or greater than the first post-flood civilizations, not because they were more advanced technologically, but because they were cognitively different. The Sumerians said it plainly. We are the descendants of those who survived, and the ruins beneath their cities are the proof.
One of the strongest pieces of evidence for a forgotten age lies in knowledge that appears far too early in human history. Knowledge that requires observation, precision, and mathematical ability that should have taken thousands of years to develop. And yet, in Sumer, it appears fully formed. Take astronomy. The Sumerians mapped the stars with extraordinary accuracy. They tracked the movements of the planets, the cycles of the moon, the equinoxes, and even the slow precession of Earth's axis, a cycle lasting almost 26,000 years. Modern science rediscovered this phenomenon only a few centuries ago, yet the earliest astronomical tablets already contain it. This is not beginner knowledge. It is inherited knowledge. Then there is mathematics. The Sumerians used a base 60 numerical system still reflected in our 60 seconds, 60 minutes, and 360 degrees. They performed geometric calculations to measure land, design canals, and plan city layouts. Their understanding of ratios and scaling was so advanced that some of their calculations match modern engineering methods. Writing appeared suddenly as well, not as crude symbols or early pictographs, but as a fully structured system, complete with grammar, phonetic signs, and standardized rules. Writing evolves over long periods. It does not erupt fully developed. Yet that is exactly what happened in Sumer. Where did all this come from? The Sumerians had an answer. We did not invent these things. We revived them. The earliest kings are described as restorers, the earliest priests as rememberers, the earliest scribes as copyists of the old tablets. They believed they were rebuilding a world, not creating one. This is reinforced by something astonishing, the Sumerian king list. On this tablet, kings before the flood ruled for thousands of years. After the flood, lifespans dropped sharply. This pattern appears in Hebrew texts, Egyptian histories, and Hindu cosmology. Always the same sequence. a long age of impossibly long-lived rulers, a flood, shorter lifespans. What explains this? It could be myth, or it could be the memory of a population genetically different from the survivors. If the pre-flood people had altered genetics, enhanced, engineered, or simply divergent, their lifespans might have been drastically different. After their extinction, the surviving humans would carry fragments of memory, but not the biology. This interpretation becomes even more compelling when we examine the strange objects found across Mesopotamia. Ancient lenses carved from rock crystal, precision-drilled holes in stone, copper objects alloyed with arsenic for improved strength, maps showing polar regions before they were covered in ice. These items appear in contexts far too early for their level of sophistication. Someone knew things they should not have known. And those someones vanished. The flood destroyed their cities. The survivors preserved their knowledge in fragments, and the Sumerians inherited what little remained. This brings us to the most unsettling possibility. What if humanity did not rise once, but twice? What if our current world is simply the second attempt? If so, then everything we consider ancient is young. Everything we call the first is only the first of our cycle, not the first of all cycles. And everything the Sumerians wrote was not myth at all, but a desperate attempt to preserve the memory of a world erased.
If a forgotten civilization existed before the flood, then its greatest fingerprint would not be temples or tools. It would be in us, in our DNA. And this is exactly where the mystery deepens. When geneticists analyze ancient human remains from Mesopotamia and nearby regions, they occasionally find anomalies, markers that do not match any known population. These markers are not Neanderthal or Denisovan. Those branches are well understood. These are something else. Short-lived, unexplained, and gone. Some early Mesopotamian remains show mitochondrial haplogroups that appear suddenly, exist for a few generations, and then vanish entirely from the genetic record. Others show Y chromosome sequences that cannot be traced to any known lineage. They appear before the flood strata and disappear afterward. This is exactly what we would expect from a population destroyed by a catastrophic event, one that left only a handful of survivors. The genetic echoes support the archaeological pattern. An older people existed, distinct from the later Sumerians. But the most mysterious point is this: these unusual markers cluster near genes related to cognition and brain development. In other words, the differences were not superficial. They were neurological. This ties directly into the mystery of human accelerated regions, those fast-evolving segments of the genome responsible for uniquely human intelligence. The most rapid changes in HARs occurred around the same period as the alleged pre-flood civilization. What caused this? Natural selection cannot explain it. Random mutation cannot explain it. Environmental pressure cannot explain it. Something changed human cognition dramatically and quickly. And then, after the flood, something changed again. It is almost as if humanity is the product of two distinct phases. Phase 1, a cognitively advanced population emerges. Phase 2, a catastrophic reset removes them, leaving survivors with modified but diminished traits. If true, then our myths are not just symbolic stories, they are genetic memories encoded in narrative form. Think of how many myths describe early humans as guided, shaped, taught, uplifted, or created or refined by beings of greater knowledge. These beings might not have been gods in the supernatural sense. They might have been biological, human, but not human like us. A sibling species, a cousin population, a predecessor. And the flood may have been the final chapter of their world. After the catastrophe, the survivors, the ancestors of modern humans, rebuilt without fully understanding the knowledge they inherited. This explains why early civilizations appear suddenly. Writing is already advanced. Astronomy is already precise. Myths describe a world before, and genetics shows traces of a vanished lineage. We are living with the aftershocks of an extinction event we no longer remember. But the clay remembers, the bones remember, and the genome remembers. And as excavation continues, the evidence grows. The story is not, how did civilization begin? The real story is what civilization ended before ours began.
The deeper we go into the lost chronicles of the Watchers, the stranger the story becomes. While humanity grew and scattered across valleys and mountains, the Watchers began undertaking journeys far beyond what the early world understood. They traveled across hidden landscapes, entered realms not meant for human eyes, and charted the foundations of knowledge that would later become myths, religions, symbols, and legends. One ancient tablet speaks of something called the threshold walk, a mysterious journey where a watcher would step beyond the air and return days later, speaking in riddles, carrying strange stones that glowed faintly in the dark. These stones were said to contain patterns, etchings that resembled stars, spirals, and geometrical shapes not present in nature. Humanity, still primitive, saw these objects as sacred artifacts. Some tribes worshipped them, others feared them, and some believed they were keys to unlocking divine power. But to the Watchers, these journeys were not religious pilgrimages. They were expeditions, missions assigned by higher celestial authorities to observe the deeper structure of creation. They believed the world was layered like a vast cosmic onion. What we see is only the first layer, the surface. Beyond it lie realms of energy, shapes, and beings without form. And if those tablets are true, the Watchers crossed those boundaries repeatedly. One of the strangest stories comes from the Chronicle of Azael, a fallen Watcher whose writings were discovered in fragments. He describes a place of echoes, a realm without light, where thoughts take shape and memories float as visible objects. He speaks of voices calling his name, guiding him toward a luminous gateway that pulsed like a living heart. What he saw beyond that gateway remains unclear, for the text breaks off mid-sentence. Scholars debate whether the missing portion was intentionally removed to protect humanity, or because what came next was too incomprehensible. But something changed after these journeys. The Watchers began returning with new emotions: fear, longing, and confusion. They spoke of the universe as a dangerous, living thing, full of entities far older than the earth itself. And some spoke of whispers telling them to alter humanity, to accelerate human evolution, to take matters into their own hands. And this is when forbidden knowledge began leaking into the human world. Metallurgy, weapon-making, advanced agriculture, star observations, and the secrets of music, writing, and architecture. Humanity leaped forward centuries beyond its natural pace. These gifts seemed miraculous, but they carried a price, because each gift created dependency. Tribes worshipped their Watcher teachers. Some built temples to honor them. Others offered sacrifices in exchange for knowledge or protection. This imbalance disrupted the natural order, the harmony between the celestial and the mortal realms. Some Watchers found themselves treated like gods, and they savored that attention. Others could not bear the weight of responsibility. A few began questioning their mission entirely. Why should they remain distant observers? Why should they suppress emotions, deny connection, or prevent themselves from forming bonds with humanity? And that question
simple yet dangerous, spread among the watchers like a spark in dry grass. Their journeys, once ordered and disciplined, became personal. They explored farther, took more risks, and acted increasingly without permission. Their missions blurred into desire, and once desire took root, the consequences became inevitable. Because forbidden journeys always lead to forbidden choices, and forbidden choices always lead to downfall. What would soon unfold would shake the heavens, fracture alliances, and alter the fate of every living being on Earth. The descent of the Watchers was no longer a matter of rebellion. It was becoming a matter of destiny. The world was about to change forever.
It began quietly. No explosions, no thunder from the heavens, no cosmic signs. Just a shift in intention, small, almost unnoticeable. The Watchers, once united under strict cosmic law, began drifting into factions. Some remained faithful to their celestial duties, while others grew increasingly fascinated, even obsessed with humanity. Those fascinated Watchers saw humans not as subjects to observe, but as partners, beings capable of love, creativity, and growth. This emotional pull became the first fracture in celestial harmony. Among them were leaders whose names echo throughout ancient myth. Semjazah, the cautious but determined leader. Azael, the gifted but reckless innovator. Arakiel, master of the earth's secrets, and others whose knowledge reshaped entire tribes. Semjazah, the reluctant leader, feared the consequences. He understood the danger of dissent better than anyone. But he also saw the loneliness among the Watchers, missions that lasted centuries, isolation that stretched across time, no family, no companions, no true connection. Humanity changed everything. Humans laughed, cried, created, and dreamed. They were fragile, yet resilient. Their mortality made every emotion more intense. For the Watchers, immortal beings of pure intellect, experiencing these feelings firsthand was intoxicating. Semjazah knew if he fell, others would follow. And if others followed, there would be no turning back. So according to the ancient texts, he made the others swear an oath, not for rebellion, but for unity. If we fall, he said, we fall together. If we face judgment, we face it as one. Meanwhile, Azael pushed for advancement. He shared metalsmithing secrets, teaching humans how to forge blades and armor. He introduced beauty techniques, crafting cosmetics and ornaments. He revealed forbidden knowledge of enchantments and warfare, gifts meant only for celestial eyes. Humanity grew powerful, too powerful. The balance the Creator had designed, slow evolution guided by gentle influence, was shattered. The faithful Watchers warned their brothers, "You are giving fire to children. They will burn the world with it." But the rebellious ones answered, "We are not harming them. We are helping them rise." And so the seeds of rebellion sprouted. The division grew. Two ideologies clashed: obedience versus compassion, duty versus desire, detachment versus connection. Yet beneath all arguments lay a silent truth. The Watchers had already crossed the line,
and humanity was changing in ways no one could control. The skies grew restless. Strange storms formed above mountain peaks, the very place where the watchers gathered at dusk. Animals grew uneasy. Earthquakes trembled beneath sacred sites. The world sensed what the heavens had not yet announced. A reckoning was coming. And once the next step was taken, nothing, not even the watchers themselves, could halt the cascade of cosmic consequences. The descent was no longer a possibility. It was happening.
If there was a single moment when fate snapped, when rebellion stopped being an idea and became an irreversible act, it was the first forbidden union between a watcher and a human. The ancient texts speak of it quietly, as though the writers themselves feared to record it, but the story remains preserved through fragments, scrolls, and whispered traditions. Her name is never given. She appears simply as the Woman of the Valley, described as kind-hearted, intelligent, and radiant in a way that drew the watcher Arakiel to her like gravity. Arakiel, the watcher of Earth's mysteries, had spent centuries mapping mountains, rivers, and the deep pathways of the soil. But when he saw her tending a small garden by the river, everything changed. This was not admiration, not curiosity. It was something the watchers were never meant to experience. Love. It broke him. He tried to suppress it, tried to remain distant. But emotions, once awakened, are not easily silenced. And for a celestial being who had never known such feelings, the pull was overwhelming. One evening, as the winds carried the scent of blooming trees, Arakiel descended fully, not as a shimmering figure of divine light, but in a form meant to be seen, touched, spoken to. He revealed knowledge to her, not forbidden secrets, but simple truths about the earth, how soil breathes, how seeds listen to the rhythm of the seasons, how water remembers every place it touches. And she listened, not with fear, but with wonder. Their bond deepened. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months, and eventually, the boundary that separated heaven from earth shattered in a single moment of union. When the other watchers learned what had happened, silence fell upon the mountain, not because they disapproved, but because they envied him. Arakiel had done what they all secretly longed to do. He had crossed the final line. And once one crossed it, the rest followed. Within months, multiple watchers formed relationships with humans. The once celestial brotherhood had fully descended into the world of flesh and emotion. But these unions produced consequences far beyond romance. For humanity, the offspring of these unions were unlike any beings ever born. Giants of immense strength, intellect, and untamed power. Their hunger grew with their bodies. Their spirits were twisted between two realms, and soon the world trembled under their steps. The heavens erupted in fury. The final act of rebellion had been committed, and the punishment was coming. But before the judgment would fall, the watchers would witness their greatest fear, their own children becoming the architects of destruction. The age of giants, terrifying, tragic, and unstoppable, was about to begin. The world changed the moment the first hybrid child drew breath. These were not ordinary children. They grew faster than human babies, spoke earlier, walked earlier, and displayed strength that defied nature. The ancient texts call them Nephilim, the offspring of the Watchers and mortal women. The Book of Enoch describes them as beings of immense size, but the lost fragments reveal something even more terrifying. Their power was not only physical, it was spiritual.
From a young age, the Nephilim could sense energy in the air, read emotions, influence small creatures, and see glimpses of things hidden behind the veil of reality. Their minds existed in two worlds at once, human and celestial. At first, the Watchers saw them as blessings. They believed their children would become bridges between heaven and earth, symbols of unity between the divine and the mortal. Many Watchers even felt pride, a dangerous new emotion for beings created solely for duty. But children grow, and power grows with them. By the time the first generation reached adulthood, they towered over humans, some standing 3 times the height of a man. Their voices shook the ground when they shouted. Their hunger was immense, their curiosity endless, and their tempers unpredictable. Villages that once welcomed the Watchers now feared their offspring. Livestock disappeared, forests were torn apart, rivers were diverted. The Nephilim would play by lifting boulders the size of houses, unaware that their games caused landslides and destruction. The Watchers tried to teach them restraint, but the Nephilim inherited the immortal fire from their fathers, the urge to dominate, to explore, to test limits. And with no celestial laws guiding them, their growth spiraled out of control. Some Nephilim became rulers, forcing humans into servitude. Others engaged in battles that reshaped entire landscapes. 2 giants clashing could create earthquakes. Their footsteps could flatten fields. Humanity cried out for help, not to the Watchers, but to the heavens above. And the heavens listened. A new decree was issued from the celestial realm. The Watchers had broken divine law. Their creations threatened the balance of the world. The experiment of forbidden union must be ended. But punishment would not come just yet. First, the consequences would unfold naturally. The world needed to see the full result of the Watchers' rebellion. As the Nephilim generations multiplied, their power increased. The air grew heavy with unrest. Strange lights appeared in the sky. Animals fled regions where giants roamed. Oceans rose. Weather patterns shifted. The earth itself seemed to resist the unnatural force growing upon it. And deep within the celestial realm, preparations for judgment began. The Watchers sensed it. The faithful ones warned their fallen brothers. "You have doomed us. You have doomed humanity. You must stop." But their warnings came too late. The giants had awakened a storm that no one, not even the Watchers, could control. The rise was complete, and the fall was drawing near.
The ancient writings say the earth is not just soil, stone, and water. It is a living consciousness, an entity that feels imbalance and reacts to it. When the Nephilim roamed freely, their presence created vibrations, energetic disturbances that the earth could not tolerate. The ground began to tremble more frequently. Volcanoes that had slept for centuries awakened. Rivers changed course, storms intensified, seasons shifted unpredictably. Harvests failed, animals migrated without pattern, sensing danger long before humans understood the cause. One ancient passage describes the earth groaning beneath the weight of the giants. Another claims the oceans withdrew in fear. Humanity believed the gods were angry. Priests and shamans offered sacrifices, prayed and cried out for deliverance. But the crisis was not caused by humanity. It was caused by something far older, far greater, a violation of cosmic law. The Watchers watched helplessly as the world descended into chaos. Their children, once symbols of wonder, became symbols of terror. Giant footprints filled with water and became lakes. Massive shadows fell over villages as Nephilim wandered, hungry and restless. Some giants turned violent, competing with one another in displays of dominance, lifting mountains, uprooting trees, throwing stones across valleys. Others preyed on humans when food became scarce, consuming entire herds in a single meal. Fear turned into desperation. Entire tribes abandoned their homes and fled into mountains, forests, or distant plains. But there was no place to hide. The world was too small for creatures so large and so powerful. Meanwhile, the faithful Watchers sent messages to the heavens, pleading for intervention. They argued that not all Watchers had rebelled, and not all giants were wicked. Some Watchers still tried to guide humanity, to protect them, to contain the damage. But the cosmic laws are not easily bent, and forgiveness was not part of this decree. Then came a moment that shook the celestial realm. A Nephilim tore open the side of a mountain simply to see how it was formed. Thousands died from the landslide that followed. That act, the careless destruction of nature and life, was the final signal. The judgment would no longer be delayed. The earth cried out, humanity cried out, even some of the Watchers cried out. But the heavens answered with silence. A silence stronger than thunder, a silence sharper than lightning. A silence that meant only one thing: the cleansing had begun. When the moment of divine intervention finally arrived, it did not come as fire or storms. It came as a single presence, brighter than the sun, taller than mountains, and more powerful than any Watcher. His name appears in dozens of ancient texts across cultures. The Archangel Uriel, the flame of God. According to the Book of Enoch, Uriel is the one who illuminates the world's mysteries, the one who reveals what must be known, but also the one who delivers warnings of destruction. When he descended, the very air changed. Winds died, clouds parted, animals fell silent. Even the giants trembled. The Watchers gathered at the foot of the mountain where he landed, their luminous forms dim compared to his radiance. They bowed, not out of respect, but out of fear. Because if Uriel had come personally, then the decision from the highest realm had already been made. A voice thundered across the landscape, not spoken through air, but through the fabric of reality itself. You have broken the sacred law. You have altered the path of humankind. You have created what should not exist. The Watchers tried to defend themselves. Semjia stepped forward, admitting responsibility for leading the oath. He claimed they acted out of compassion, not rebellion. He begged for mercy, for their children, if not for themselves. But Uriel did not respond with anger. He responded with sorrow. Their existence distorts creation. Their hunger consumes the land. Their steps break the bones of the earth. Your love has created suffering. Your freedom has created destruction. Then came the sentence. The giants will be removed from the earth. Humanity will be cleansed. And you, Watchers who fell,
will be bound for the remainder of the age." The watchers cried out in grief, but it was too late. A decree made in the highest heavens cannot be undone. Uriel delivered one final warning to humanity. "Prepare, for a flood shall come over the whole earth." This was not poetic imagery, it was literal. The world would be washed clean. The giants, with all their power, could not withstand the force that was coming. The watchers, no matter how radiant, could not escape the chains forged for them. And humanity, though terrified, still had a chance through one man chosen to survive. But that part of the story was yet to unfold. For now, the sentence had been spoken. And the sky itself seemed to mourn.
The moment the judgment was declared, the watchers knew what awaited them. The Book of Enoch describes their punishment vividly. They would be bound beneath the mountains in the darkest regions of the earth until the final day. But how does one bind beings made of celestial fire? The process was unlike anything humanity could imagine. Uriel summoned forces from the unseen realm, beings of justice, entities that moved without sound, shaped like shadows wrapped in light. These were the binders, described only in fragments scattered through ancient texts. One by one, the watchers were seized, their luminous bodies dimmed. Their wings, symbols of divine authority, were stripped away like fading smoke. For the first time in their existence, they felt something they had never known. Weight, gravity, shame. But the most painful part was not the chains themselves, it was the silence of heaven. The place they once called home had turned its face away. Semjazo was the first to be bound. He did not resist. He merely asked that the judgment fall on him alone, not on the others. But cosmic law does not bend for noble intentions. Azarel, in contrast, resisted fiercely. He cried out that humanity needed his knowledge, that the world would collapse without the tools he had given them. But his protests only echoed against the mountains as he was dragged into the shadows. One by one, they disappeared beneath the earth, sealed away in caverns untouched by time. Chains forged from celestial essence wrapped around them, chains that no physical force could break. According to legend, the screaming of the watchers reverberated through the mountains for 7 days. The sky darkened, the stars hid, even the giants paused, sensing the fall of their heavenly fathers. And just as the last watcher vanished into the abyss, Uriel spoke. "The age of rebellion is ended. Now begins the age of cleansing." When the final seal was placed, the mountains fell silent. But humanity was not yet safe. The greatest storm in history was preparing to rise. The flood had not yet begun, but the world already felt the approach of something enormous, something unstoppable. And overhead, the sky grew heavier.
The flood did not start as a sudden catastrophe. It began with subtle signs, signs that only a few noticed. Birds migrated in strange patterns. The air grew thick and heavy. Clouds gathered in unnatural formations. Even the giants sensed it, growling uneasily as thunder rumbled across clear skies. Then came the rains. At first, they seemed ordinary, but within hours they intensified. The drops fell like stones. Winds howled like living creatures. Rivers burst from their banks. Lakes overflowed.
Entire forests bent beneath the weight of the storm. And this was only the beginning. From beneath the earth, underground springs erupted with explosive force. The fountains of the deep, as the ancient texts call them, tore open. Water surged upward from the fractured crust of the planet. It didn't fall from the sky alone. It rose from the ground. Villages vanished in minutes. Mountains disappeared behind walls of rain. The giants roared in confusion, then in terror, as the waters reached their knees, then their shoulders. Some tried to swim, their enormous bodies thrashing violently. Others attempted to climb mountains, only to find that even the highest peaks were soon engulfed. Humanity cried out, but the world was too loud to hear them. Lightning split the sky. Thunder shattered the air. Winds tore apart anything standing. And through it all, one man and his family moved steadily, faithfully. Noah. He did not build his ark in panic. He built it in obedience. While others mocked him, he worked. While others doubted, he prepared. While others worshipped giants or feared the watchers, he listened to a different voice, a voice from the heavens that told him to stand firm while the world fell apart. As the ark rose with the waters, the giants screamed below, their strength meaningless against the weight of divine judgment. The waters claimed them one by one. The Nephilim age ended beneath the waves. For 40 days and 40 nights the rain did not stop. For months, water covered every mountain, every forest, every valley. When the storms finally ceased, the world that emerged was not the same. The age of watchers and giants was gone. A new chapter of humanity had begun. But the consequences of the watchers' rebellion, their teachings, their secrets, their offspring, would echo through history. Whispered in myths, hidden in symbols, buried in sacred texts, waiting for those brave enough to uncover the truth.